Hi everyone! The Amazon forest forms the biologically richest region on Earth, hosting 25% of the global biodiversity. It has been estimated to harbor around 16,000 tree species. It covers vast 7.5 million square kilometers in 9 countries, or nearly 40% of the South American continent. In this video, I will share with you the results of a scientific research in which I participated that asked, what is the geographical distribution of tree species in the Amazon rainforest? Are there Amazonian subregions with different species groups? What factors help explain this spatial organization? My name is Alexandre Souza. I am a professor of ecology at Rio Grande do Norte Federal University in Brazil. The paper was written by biologist and PhD candidate Carla Silva Souza and me and published in the Journal of Ecology with the same title as this video, Woody Plant Subregions of the Amazon Forest. The Amazon forest is surrounded by a variety of other biomes to which it has contributed over the last million years as an important source of different plant lineages. Despite its global importance and in spite of recent advances in the understanding of the distribution of its tree species and evolutionary relatedness, regionalization of the Amazon's tree flora is still lacking. Clear and data-driven delimitation of subregions is a growing scientific enterprise, with consequences for macroecological and biogeographical studies to the understanding of animal distribution and evolution, besides being a requisite for conservation planning and management. A common way of assessing the spatial organization of vegetation is based on vegetation types. These are defined based on vegetation characteristics like deciduousness and architectural complexity as the official Brazilian vegetation classification system. In this map of vegetation types produced by EVA and collaborators, you can see that most of the Amazon forest is this medium shade of green here, indicating lowland broadleaf forests. These pink bands indicate high-altitude forests in the foothills of the Andes. These yellow spots are islands of savannas, and the darker green spot means flooded forests. You can see that although very useful in many situations, the classification to vegetation types doesn't allow you to understand how species are distributed. It does not directly portray the structure of biodiversity. And there is the also important identification of ecoregions accomplished by teams of experts. Ecoregions are identified based on a large number of factors, analyzing the patterns and composition of biotic and abiotic phenomena such as climate, rivers, topography, vegetation types, as well as plant and animal species. We compiled data on woody species composition from 301 local forests based on species occurrences. Local forests were distributed along the territorial extension of the Amazon forest domain. Species occurrence data came from floristic surveys published in journal articles, books, theses, herbarium records, and online inventory data repository, ranging from 1953 to 2018. Data from herbaria were selected to correspond to local forests rather than scattered individual plant samples. For each local forest, we obtained 21 explanatory variables, including climate, soil, hydrology, elevation, stability since the last glaciation, current human activity, and indicators of historical indigenous activities. Species restricted to a single forest in the dataset totaled 1534, or 30.2% of the total, and the average number of species per forest, per local forest, was nearly 120, illustrating the species richness across Amazonian sites and the vast number of rare species in the Amazon forest as a whole. The change in the identity of the species found between local forests in our dataset was depicted in maps of what we call the interpolated dissimilarity, where cells of similar colors contained similar woody plant assemblages, providing a visual representation of the turnover of species across space, the so-called beta diversity. This map remembers us how the species found in different locations change gradually across the Amazon basin, leading to regions with largely different tree floras. Note that colors do not have a specific meaning here, only their differences and similarities indicate differences and similarities in their tree species composition. We identified 13 woody species subregions of the Amazon forest, as depicted in this image. These results are hypotheses of macroecological subdivisions of the Amazon forest that can be further tested and improved with additional data. Indicator species were also identified for the subregions. Note that each of these subregions have shared species with other subregions, as well as exclusive species. We can see that the Guiana's shield was split into eastern and western floristic blocks, that large subregions were formed in the easternmost Amazonian forests in Brazil, as well as in its westernmost parts in Peru and western Brazilian Amazonia, with large subregions also in southern Peru and Bolivia. Other differentiated areas were the Colombian Amazon, the area along the Negro River in Brazil and Venezuela, Central Amazon, and areas around the border with the Cerrado savannas in central Brazil. Now, if we assess the floristic relationships between those subregions, we find that they group together in 4 larger blocks, which we called floristic zones. A broad east-west division from the young soils at the Andes to the older and weathered soils in the Brazilian eastern Amazon was found, with 2 smaller subdivisions at the north of the Amazon, which encompassed northern Brazilian as well as the Colombian and Venezuelan parts of the region. The shapefiles of the subregions as well as the floristic zones are available as online supporting information and can be downloaded and used for research, conservation, and management planning. The affiliation of assemblages to different subregions was related to environmental gradients and to human activities. The occurrence of a colder winter, which is more common to the south of the Amazon basin, the occurrence of a dry season, which increases from west to east, variation in the soil content of clay and silt, changes in soil acidity, the occurrence of seasonal flooding by large rivers, changes in altitude, terrain roughness, the current footprint of human activities, like roads and settlements, and also marks of the past indigenous activity, like the terra preta or black soil, were all statistically significant and helped explain the differences between subregions. This study has highlighted the importance of studying the spatial patterns of biodiversity for each group of animals and plants separately, as in this case it was the trees. This is because the results were quite different from ecoregions, which take into account different animal and plant groups as well as physical features of the environment, and were also different from maps of vegetation types. This suggests that some barriers that are important for animals, like big rivers, are not so important for trees. Also, our results supported the view that vegetation maps based on vegetation types should not be used as indicators or proxies to plant diversity subregions due to the marked mismatch between vegetation types and biodiversity subregions. For example, broad-leaved evergreen pluvial forests cover most of the Amazon forest domain, and yet we found different compositional subregions within the single vegetation type. In contrast, entire vegetation units like deciduous forests, evergreen forests, Campinarana dwarf forests, flooded forests, and heath vegetation did not correspond to well-defined subregions. The compositional and vegetation type mismatch supports recent claims that there is considerable phenotypic plasticity or physical variation among species occurring across different vegetation types, like variations in deciduousness and height. The results had some similarities with previous division proposals based on field and herbarium knowledge of the Amazonian flora, but the differences show the importance of using numerical tools to identify more precise patterns. We do not propose the substitution of one regionalization method for another. We believe that the expert-based ecoregions, the vegetation type maps, and our wood species subregions represent complementary approaches that can be used in different applied situations. They represent different facets of the spatial arrangement of biodiversity and deserve to be studied to form a more complete knowledge of life on Earth. The link with past indigenous activity highlights the effect of ancient societies in sectors of modern Amazon forests and confirms the recent refutation of the idea of the Amazon being untouched by man. At the same time, there is an increased forest loss and fragmentation due to encroachment by settlements and industrial agriculture. If the Amazon forest consists of 13 distinct subregions with many rare endemic species, then this confirms the need of multiple protected areas that cover large forest expanses. The Amazon presents a large and relatively well-connected protected area network, covering 52.2% of the basin. In the Brazilian Amazon alone, there were 718 protected areas covering more than 2 million square kilometers in 2014, nearly half of which allow sustainable use of natural resources or are indigenous reserves. Our results confirm that this wide protected area cover is necessary given the spatial structure of the Amazon woody flora into distinct subregions. The relevance of rainfall seasonality to the distribution of subregions we found agrees with recent evidence that climate change, especially the increasing frequency and severity of droughts, is likely to have a profound impact on the spatial organization of the Amazon woody flora. This is because the flora of the subregions associated with seasonal droughts may expand, tracking increased drought events throughout the basin, at the expense of subregions associated with aseasonal wet climates, which may contract and lose area and therefore species. Despite their potential usefulness, our results must be viewed with caution. The high number of species and endemisms and the vast geographical extension of the Amazon forest makes the task of identifying woody plant subregions in the domain particularly challenging. Field inventory data points are scarce in the Amazon relative to the area of the basin, and botanical collections are heavily clumped in geographical space. The level of taxonomical understanding is also lower than in many other areas in the world. These complications are reflected in our dataset, and it should be noted that the lack of field data for areas in the far western and eastern parts of the basin makes our results for these regions rather speculative. Furthermore, the heterogeneity inherent to our dataset resulting from different sampling methods and potential taxonomic uncertainty could bias our results, since different methods may capture variable proportions of local species pools. We hope that this work will contribute to increase our knowledge about the geographical organization of the arboreal biodiversity of the Amazonian forests and stimulate future work in the field. This work pays tribute to the hundreds of researchers and their assistants from many countries who have worked over decades to collect and describe local forests and local tree communities. This work was supported by the Rio Grande do Norte Federal University and the Rio Grande do Norte State in Brazil, to which we are grateful.